Welcome to the Truth Over Facts podcast. I'm your host, Dylan, and my
And I'm
co-host,
Ronnie.
Rhonda.
I'm Ronnie. How's it going, everybody?
Figure we do a little podcast since the whole entire right-wing nut conspiracy, or so we were all told, that the Fluhan virus was actually a Pandalorian fucking a bat. But now apparently, what was it? Mickey Mouse was fucking a bat in South Park. But now apparently it's actually come out that it escaped from the lab from the EPA. Was it the EPA or the Energy Department?
Energy department.
Yeah, Energy Department came out and said that. All good in the hood because now all of a sudden, like, I don't even like. Can we just take it at like face value that every single thing that happened during COVID was a lie?
Yes.
Okay, so like when I was telling everybody, like in the previous podcast, that COVID was just camouflage. The virus was real, but the excuses weren't. They
Mhm.
needed a reason to bail out the big banks
And they
because it
needed a
was,
reason to control you.
yeah, exactly. Because, like, imagine if the banks stopped working, like, where all the banks failed again. Like, you would need a bailout even bigger, twice the size of '08. Do you
Mhm.
really think the American people would go for that shit, especially under Trump?
Absolutely not, dog.
Exactly. Because, like, that's why here's a little timeline of like things that were going on in 2019. In 2019, when 2020 hit, I was telling everybody like Trump got COVID back in like I want to say October or November. Trump got COVID
Mhm.
when he went over to China for the trade deal and shit. Remember that?
Mhm. Yeah.
And they were like China came on over and they signed the whole entire trade deal, but there was a clause in there that said if there's a pandemic, it's off of all
Mhm.
things, right?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stipulations saying that if there's a pandemic or like if somebody instigated war or some shit like that, the whole trade deal would be completely off. Well, like 4 months later, what have you, the trade deal, nobody even talks about that
Do they
trade.
put this kind of writing in all their trade deals?
Yeah, they can, but like one of them was specifically for a pandemic and shit, though. I remember
Mhm.
that, but like not a lot of people know this, but like I'm pretty sure it was October or November. Trump had to go to the
Walter
uh
Reed Clinic.
yeah, Walter Reed Clinic and they wouldn't say what it was,
Mhm.
but he it was just like the media just kind of like played it off as like, oh, he's getting his physical or whatever. Not like what the hell you need to get a physical for? The dude eats KFC every day, you know, and
It's
McDonald's.
McDonald's, dog. It's McDonald's.
Yeah, I don't know
He
why you
knows
need
the menu better than you.
exactly. And so he got like COVID, I bet, but he didn't want to come out publicly and say that he got sick while over there because right? Because like it's not custom to Chinese
Culture or
culture,
customs.
correct, to like call them out on shit like that. And if you
Yeah.
do, it's got to be behind closed doors. So he was just kind of like trying to save the trade deal and shit. But a lot of people also don't know is that one of the very first Americans that got, and you can look this shit up because I had to relook it up because I got a really good memory.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when COVID first broke out in what, like February is when it hit the mainstream and shit. But like from the
When
guy
it
that
hit the
I listened
main,
to,
it hit the main wet market in Wuhan, supposedly.
supposedly, yeah. But I listened to a guy by the name of Cliff High on YouTube, and maybe some of our listeners listen to him and stuff like that. Super
Mm.
smart guy. He used to be a software engineer for Microsoft, and he also deals with languages.
Mm.
Language linguistics is kind of how they caught the Unabomber in his manifesto,
Yeah.
where like humans are accustomed to using certain words, like on the podcast, I always say like and right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like humans naturalistically use the same words over and over again as part of their dialect. and you can kind of use those words to create a profile of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, this guy Cliff High that I've been listening to for the last, he's the one who introduced me to Bitcoin and stuff like that.
Oh,
All the way back in,
interesting.
all the way back. I've been listening to him since like 2016.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, for like 6 years I've been listening to him. Super smart guy and shit like
Mm-hmm.
that. And he uses linguistics in his computer software to use, he calls them internet spiders.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like GPT
Yeah.
before Chat GPT, where essentially he uses these internet spiders to comb through Twitter. He primarily uses Twitter because Twitter is updated constantly, right? It's like real
Mm-hmm.
time, real
Yeah.
present time. So he uses the spiders and to comb through all of that information in dialect.
Yeah.
And his software will kick back certain things of the future that the software can kind of predict. But it wasn't until like maybe October, November, Cliff High was saying on his internet because he got shut down off of YouTube, I think. That he was saying that there's some shit going on in China right now, like a virus or something like that. And he would post videos of, he called it the sunshine virus
Just
because
so folks get this straight, this is like what, October, November of like 2020, right? Or
19,
2019?
yeah,
2019?
yep, October, November of 19, because he
Okay.
was still on Twitter. He still is on Twitter.
Yeah.
He used to use his data linguistics to come up with a subscription,
Mm-hmm.
however you want to call it, where it was like $10, I think, or something like that, where $10
Okay.
every single month, his spiders would coast through all this information and it would come up with predictive kind of like means and shit. Like, if I remember correctly, he came up with the sunshine disease, a kickback, where COVID primarily, if our listeners have any medical education stuff, COVID primarily hurt older people, but it also was centrally focused on African Americans because African Americans naturalistically are vitamin D deficient.
Mm-hmm.
African Americans have very, very low vitamin D. Well, um, he was saying that through his data and shit like that, that there was a virus breaking out in China. So he has connections in China because he was a Microsoft engineer. So people would send him videos, and you would see like videos of people walking in a park, and all of a sudden they just keel the fuck over.
Mm. Wow.
He was sending over videos, and this is like October, November, because he was like, "Hey, shit's hitting the fan over there. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but like something big is coming down the pipeline, kind of shit."
So he was like the initial like newsbreaker of,
Yeah, whistleblower,
yeah.
as if you want to put it. Because me
Mm-hmm.
being the prepper that I am, he got me involved in Bitcoin and shit. And around that time, I was like, it hit 20,000. So I was like, I got into it real cheap. So I believed him and shit. And I'm like, yeah, this guy is super smart and shit. If you ever listen to him on YouTube,
Yeah.
his name is Cliff High. I think his subscription is called like Half Past Dead.
Cliff High as in High.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
It's like Half Past Human is the name of his
Yeah.
Twitter follower, or his Twitter feed is Half Past Human.
Mm-hmm.
So October, November, he was on Twitter saying that, hey, shit's hitting the fan over in China, like they're locking people down, and like he posted videos of people in the street just passing the fuck out. People in hazmat suits and shit. Like all of a sudden, I still to this day remember one video where there's Chinese officials in hazmat suits, and one of them just cocks a gun, puts it
Mm-hmm.
in his holster, and then they go into a building. Because you remember, dude, and that was like 4 or 5 months before you saw all that shit in China where they were spraying the streets and shit like that. So what I'm trying to get at is that he used this software that he created to kind of like predict that it wasn't necessarily COVID-19. They didn't even have a name for the shit yet, right?
Yeah.
But he would just call it the sunshine disease. and he recommended. He's a big holistic guy too, and he recommended zinc, chaga mushrooms. So like on my coffee, I have chaga
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms. It's great with inflammation stuff like that, and
Yeah.
large doses of vitamin D and vitamin C. He said, but he was the one who kind of got me into that whole entire like conspiracy shit. But at the same time, he also said that it was a bioweapon, and this is like October and November. His shit started coming back more and more that it was a bioweapon, that it wasn't a wet market or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. And he kept saying it's a fucking bioweapon that escaped or some shit like that.
Yeah.
And our listeners can even look this up, is that one of the very first Americans that got COVID-19 was an American soldier. Anyone remember like when the battleships were like freaking out because everybody was getting sick on the battleships and
Yes.
they couldn't come home and shit like that because
Yes.
like the
And then there
military
was
didn't know what was
a
going on.
Navy commander that was relieved of his command
Yep,
because he
exactly.
did a mandatory dock. He like refused orders to stay out at sea and docked.
Yeah. Yep. And they were
And
all applauding him and stuff like that. All of his
yeah.
cadets are right. This is a couple years ago, so we got a pretty good memory of it. But like when all
Mm-hmm.
that shit was going down, one of the very first Americans that got COVID was in South America, and he was a soldier or South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So, if has anybody ever seen the movie, um, like Spectre? I think it's
Double O
Spectre.
Seven.
Yeah, with 007 with Daniel Craig. I think it's either Spectre, otherwise it might
Was that
be
the last one?
no, No Time to Die, the
Oh,
latest
No
one.
Time to Die.
Yeah,
Okay.
No Time to Die. What that was, it was a virus, nanobots. Essentially, it was nanobots that were like specifically made for specific DNA that could kill people and shit like that. But there's
Mm-hmm.
a scene in that movie where like they break into a viral lab and they steal it and shit like that. So when I
Yeah.
heard that there was an American soldier in South Korea, I'm like, well, how did he get infected if he's in South Korea?
Mm-hmm.
And this broke out in China.
Yeah.
South Korea and fucking China really don't, they get along, but they really don't.
Mm-hmm.
Because China supports North Korea. South Korea and North Korea fucking hate each other.
Oh yes. With
So,
a fiery passion
right.
of a thousand burning suns.
So all this shit was going on. Trump went to the hospital right after he got back from China.
And don't for was it he only had it once in office, right?
He had it twice. That's what I'm
Oh,
saying.
twice.
Because,
Okay, so the second time around, the second time around is when he had all his supporters sitting outside of the clinic with signs, and then he makes his Secret Service get like all geared up, like gowned up, and then they go on like a little parade.
pledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. So it's like, and you got to remember too, like even before the vaccines and shit, like Trump was playing it off because like he had already gotten, and he would naturalistically be like, "Oh, it's not that bad, right?"
Yeah,
Like,
and there was
because
already a deal in place.
if he had already gotten it, do you really think he would say like, "Oh shit, there's this virus breaking out"? But if he got it and he succumbed to it because he gets the best healthcare in the world, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, it because there's also a deal in place, and then he's
right, he
also
doesn't want
not
to
going to
blow it
tell
up.
Xi Jinping that, hey, you got me sick, you bastard. What the hell? What the
Yeah,
hell's
you got
going
me
on
sick.
here? What'd you put in the food?
But I think him just trying to make broker a deal, right? Because at that time you got to remember like shit was kind of falling apart at that point in
Hmm.
2019.
Yeah.
From October to December, the stock market took a biggest shit since 1931 because the Fed was raising interest rates.
Hmm.
So from October 18 to December 18, the market took a shit and essentially it was leading us into a recession. So Trump being the naturalistic marketer that he needs, he was riding on any fucking coattail that he can get to try to
Yes.
boost morale. And I remember Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury,
Mm-hmm.
when the yield curve inverted. If I remember right, it was like it inverted in the summer of 2019, which means that the
Yes.
debt market is starting to blow up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the bond market is starting to blow up. So they asked Steve Mnuchin, like, the yield curve inverted. 9 times out of 10, that's always predicted a recession is going to happen. And Steve Mnuchin, without skipping a beat, is like, no, we're not going into a recession. Kind of like every administration, just like Biden. What's the definition of a recession? Two negative quarters of GDP. We had that. Oh, we just changed the fucking definition of it. Well, Steve Mnuchin said, "Oh, we're not going into a recession. The economy's booming. Tax cuts. It's rocket fuel and shit." Well then, 2 months after Steve Mnuchin in the summer said we're not going to recession, the repo market blew up, it
Mm-hmm.
collapsed. So the banks weren't trusting one another. Then a month after that, or 2 months after that, Trump goes into the hospital or whatnot, unbeknownst to anybody. Oh, it's a routine checkup kind of shit. I'm like, you
Mm-hmm.
just got back from China. I don't know about that. I'm listening to my guy Cliff High who was saying that shit's hitting the fan in China right now, and they're locking people down, and people are passing the fuck out or dying. They're spraying shit everywhere. They're trying to maintain some of the first Chinese virologists. Remember they went missing and shit,
Yes.
and
Yep.
they're like, "Well, what's going on? Like, how are these people just going missing and shit because they were whistleblowing, right?"
Yeah, one of them whistleblowed, and I think didn't one of the scientists wasn't they uh one of the scientists was supposedly like taken away or something like that?
Yeah, they just all it's
Or
China.
they
It's like Russia. They
probably
just
killed
disappear
him?
and shit.
Yeah, they
He fell
disappear.
out of a
Yes,
one-story window.
disappear. The
Yeah.
Houdini act. Yes,
Yeah,
that's what
they
they
just
do
they
over
fell
there.
out of a one-story, with a bullet in their back.
Yes, but the madness that ensued there, and especially, late last year, it it's just terrible.
Hmm.
Like when you watch, people getting their doors welded shut to stay stay
Right,
in their homes.
right. And what they were saying, the guy that I was listening to, if I remember correctly, like when they were spraying all that shit
Yeah.
in China and Wuhan,
Mm-hmm.
they were just everybody's locked in, and had these cars or whatnot, these military vehicles just spraying shit everywhere. What they were spraying is they were spraying silver. I think silver ions or whatnot, because silver is positively charged, and it
Well,
draws the virus.
that's not good to breathe in though.
No, no, that's why they're all wearing hazmat suits. That's why
Yeah.
they locked everybody down, literally, so they
Mm-hmm.
could spray the whole fucking cities with silver ions. Like so, they even have something you can buy off of Amazon that I take too. It's called silver. What the hell is it called? It's called Sovereign Silver.
Okay.
Sovereign Silver is just kind of like liquefied silver ions.
Does it come in like one of those little beaker
Yep,
droplet things you
yep,
just put on your tongue?
yep, exactly. And then what that does is help boost your immune system and stuff like that. But China in the cities and stuff, they were spraying silver everywhere, silver ions, because they're positively charged. So the
Mm-hmm.
virus will be attracted to it, and because it's silver, it's heavy, so it falls to the ground, so it doesn't spread everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like it's airborne and shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I said from the get go. We have a lot of like nurse friends and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're saying that I was the only motherfucker at the bonfire saying like it's a bioweapon. And, just like any person who doesn't understand what is going on,
Oh, you're fucking crazy. Shut
yeah, you're
up.
a conspiracy theorist. And
You
I
don't know
said,
what you're
uh-huh.
talking about. People are
Right.
dying out there.
Right. Everybody's dying and shit. I said, yeah, because the government.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were like me and you paid attention, you could see the financial system was collapsing. And then all of a sudden, they're trying to come up with this story of the virus and shit like that. But like, look at what the government did. They took old people who were had COVID and they put them back in nursing homes and shit to infect everybody else.
So do you think that this virus may also have a big part to do with trying to recoup for the Social Security debacle that
Yeah,
is
because it's
happening.
primarily right. It's primarily kills because like when I would tell all my like nurse friends and their wives, it's a bioweapon, and they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, well, okay, explain to me some certain things that I have questions about. I'm not a virologist, but maybe you're a nurse, so maybe you can solve this fucking problem.
Hmm.
Okay. So I said, okay, so why does it infect older people but not younger people? When older people's immune system is compromised with preconditions and stuff like that, but at the same time, younger people weren't like, I'm talking between the ages of like 1 and 10, right?
Hmm.
How come they weren't getting infected at all, really? I didn't hear any stories about any of that shit. It was just older people, right? We got to protect the elderly. We got to protect the elderly.
Hmm.
Well, it's opposite sides of the spectrum. If you're old and you have preconditions, your immune system is compromised. And if you're really young, your immune system is very vulnerable because you haven't built up enough immunities. So I would tell my nurse friends and stuff like that, well, explain that shit to me. How can it attack older people, but yet the younger people, like, what are they, the carriers or what? And that's when they came up with that whole bullshit. Oh, you might be asymptomatic kind of crap, right? Like,
Hmm.
anytime there's a common sense kind of question, they just reword it into something that they can't even fucking justify. Oh, you're asymptomatic. Okay. But like I told a lot of my
Yeah.
nurse friends and their wives at bonfires and shit, I said, okay, I'm no virologist or anything like this, but if we have to wear masks, don't our eyes have mucous membranes?
Hmm. Yes.
The average person touches their face between 2,000 and 3,000 times a day.
And that's usually what makes somebody
Sick.
susceptible to being sick. Yes,
Right.
because
You're touching shit. You're
yes,
wiping your ass. You know, you're touching toilet seats and shit like that.
and you're picking your nose, and then
Yeah.
you're
And then
rubbing
you're
your
rubbing your
eyes.
eyes. So I would explain that to my nurse friends and their wives. I'm like, well, the mask doesn't mean shit. And they're like, yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. I said, no, it doesn't. I said, if your eyes, explain this to me. If we all have to wear masks, we should all be wearing glasses too, or goggles, right? You can
Hmm.
get a fucking virus in your ear canal, and because you have mucous membranes on your eardrum.
Yes, an ear infection. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly right. And they just go with the fucking flow because they're too fucking what's the word? They're just brainwashed.
lost in the sauce.
Yeah, lost in the sauce. And they don't want to admit that this could be a bioweapon because why would the fucking government lie? You know?
And also at the same time, it's just, maybe, they did have second thoughts, but that's when, their second thoughts could have cost them their job if they were to speak out against it,
Well, that's just
like
it. And look at how many of these
a,
nurses fell for
a
this shit. I
yeah,
feel
a
really
lot of
bad for the nurses because
yeah,
they all got lied to and shit over
the
this.
nurses and the doctors.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
But
lot of doctors that are waking up to what's really going on now.
right,
And but yeah, the people that took an oath to take care of you, to give you the right treatment, they were misled.
but the
And
pharmaceutical companies didn't take that oath.
yeah, but they made people kind of look like people like you and me look kind of dumb
Right, because
because we refused something that we felt we didn't need.
right.
Because
And
everybody gets sick.
yeah. It
Everybody gets sick, and our way of dealing with sickness is just to to deal with it.
well, that's
Let
just
our
it.
body work itself out.
Anytime the fucking media overhype shit. I mean, this is the same media that lied to everybody about the Iraq war, 9/11 and shit. Don't ask no questions,
Yes.
otherwise you're anti-American. I could see that same shit going down during COVID and seeing all the brainwashed people act just like how people were acting against, 9/11.
Hmm.
No, they attacked us. Well, did you ever think that maybe it was our own government so that we could keep the military industrial complex going? Why would they do that? You
Hmm.
know, Same thing with a lot of these nurses and shit. They got duped into it. I know a lot of nurses and stuff like that, but at the same time, like, the hospitals are just as corrupt as any other institution.
Oh yeah, their
You have the
boards. Yeah.
CEO of the hospital making 10, $20 million for hollowing out their hospitals. You used to have a fucking nurse in the 1950s for every patient. Now you have one nurse for a whole floor. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And then all of a sudden this virus hits, and then all of a
And
sudden,
hospitals are getting kickbacks.
yep, exactly right. $10,000 per COVID patient from the federal government. You know, every single fucking crisis is created from money and greed.
Hmm.
No other things, unless it's a tornado or some shit. There's always money behind it. And to see a lot of these nurses get caught up in this shit and be the patsy for it breaks my heart. It really
Hmm.
does.
Yes.
You're ex-military, you're ex-marine. You know, I said to a couple of our nurse friends and their wives, like, I feel bad for you because a lot of you suffer from post-traumatic stress now after, COVID and shit. But you were kind of lied into this narrative the similar way that, Marines were and shit over 9/11 and
And
Iraq
they
war.
didn't have, they didn't have time to really
Sit back and look at the problem.
yeah, and then when they did, it was too late.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those nurses, God rest their souls and stuff, the ones that were, passing away during COVID and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But when you saw, like, even the nurses started to figure this shit out when they were like, so wait, I tested positive. The quarantine date is 14 days. It's only been 7, but now you want me to come out. You say it's okay.
Yeah.
Right? So even the narrative wasn't even working out. And they're
Hmm.
the medical experts. So, and you have a lot of them that would try to guilt trip people. Like, look how animalistic people turned during the pandemic and shit. Put
Hmm.
your fucking mask on. You're killing people and shit.
Yeah, the
And I was always the
hostility
cynic being
towards
like,
the hostility towards people that just felt
don't
like it
go
was
against
their
the flow
right
with the
to not
narrative.
wear a mask.
Yeah.
You know, why, people singled people out. If you're not vaccinated, you're not allowed to eat at a certain establishment, or
Right.
you can't go watch a basketball game. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
Exactly right.
And the
But
people that were shamed for that will never forget.
exactly. And that's who do you think they're going to take their anger out once the system fails again and shit? All those people, like, fucking, this is why, you have the conservatives and the
They're going to
liberals
come
at each
back at the
other's
people
necks.
that didn't take the vaccine in the first place. They're going to say, "Why didn't you warn us?
Right.
Where were you?"
But that's how they have always been throughout history. So wait, I did what you told me, and you mean now I'm dying because I listened to you? No, And me being the cynic and like the anarchist that I am, I'm like, what? You get what you fucking deserve, you idiot. Why can't you just think for yourself? You
Mhm.
know? And you have so many people that have been brainwashed in the education system, the universities, the liberals and shit. Liberals always think with their fucking feelings instead of logic. And sometimes conservatives think too much logically without any feelings.
Liberals
And you
think
need both.
based off this pandemic showed me that liberals think based off of what the government tells them. And it's a
Right.
yes man sort of game to them, you know.
Hmm. Well, I always say, like, liberals act like communists. They listen to the fucking government.
Hmm.
Whereas, like,
They think the
conservatives,
government is their best friend. They
yeah,
think that whatever the government says, automatically this is what you should do. The government wants to go to war with Ukraine. Slava Ukraine, let's do this.
yeah, I need a Ukrainian flag.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get our Ukrainian bumper stickers put on the
Right.
cars right
And
away.
I've always said there's opposite sides of the spectrum on everything, okay? There's a yin and a yang, but in the middle of it, there's a black fucking line that separates the two.
Hmm.
Be the black line. I think Jordan Peterson said, you have like a yin and a yang. You have chaos on one side and law and order on the other. In order to maintain balance, you have to have a foot in both, right?
Hmm.
But, liberals are like communists. They rely on the fucking government, whereas like conservatives, aka Republicans or what have you, rely on like fascism and corporatism. The corporations will get us out of this mess, and the government, in order to solve majority of the problems, you need both. That
Mm-hmm.
is essentially capitalism, is where like the government and the corporations kind of fight against one another. That's capitalism because they allow more freedom towards like the populace because they both try to make money off of the populace,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's only when they work together and they merge and shit like that where the corporations own the government. That's fascism, like the pharmaceutical companies or the medical mafia, as if you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Another thing is a lot of the people out there is they don't do their own research. They just take like
well,
the
that was
legacy
part of the
media's
conspiracy
word
theory.
for it.
Yeah, that was
And
part of the conspiracy theory. Oh, did you read that off the internet? I had so many people say that to me. Oh, did you read that off the internet? And I said, yeah, I read it off the same thing that fucking told you you're gonna die.
independent journalists
Right.
have turned a page for a whole brand new view of journalism. I
Mhm.
mean, like you can listen to legacy media and what they're saying, but then you go and you do your deep dive research with independent journalism.
Right. Question everything. You
Yeah.
know, you should have a.
They're not getting paid like millions of dollars to go on locations and
Mhm.
interview people and trying to find the answer to problems.
Well, that's why the media structure tries to go out of its way to cover up all this shit and to try to tell you a narrative that they want to push.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just it. Remember in August 2019, Epstein died. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you had this big giant COVID shit that just overtook all the media. It
Mm-hmm.
took over Trump's failed trade war. It took over the economy was going into recession. It just took over all this shit for a year and a half. And we're still living in it, right? That's why like the government created all of these backstops. In the financial world, they call them special purpose vehicles because the whole entire system is predicated on lending money, other people's money,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that the other person can gamble with it or speculate on it. Well, when the COVID shit hit and the repo market collapsed, the lending kind of seized up. And then
Yeah.
you have the commercial paper markets where like companies use the commercial paper markets to fund themselves and their payrolls.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when that starts freezing up, that's why the government came up with all of these things called special purpose vehicles or lending facilities because nobody wanted to lend.
Mm-hmm.
So it was twice as big as the 2008 financial crisis. In 2018, this is how the fucking government works, right? They bail everybody out, but you won't get to know who they bailed out after 10 years. Okay?
Yeah.
So the 2008 financial crisis happened in 2008. The report on the 2008 because everybody wanted to know, the government and Congress wanted to know where all that money went, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how much of it went. That came out in 2018, that report, 10 years after the fact. The Federal Reserve printed $30 trillion.
Mm.
30 trillion to get out of that mess. Okay? So one of the things that you can see is you put the national debt. When Obama got into office, it was like 8 trillion. When he left, it was, I want to say, 19 trillion.
Yeah.
Okay, so he doubled it. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which they buy assets and toxic debt and shit like that out of the system to keep the system going.
Mm-hmm.
That went from 800 billion to 4 trillion
So pretty much when they're creating money out of thin air, they're just devaluing the currency in and itself,
to buy bad loans.
and it's just putting us in a deeper hole that we'll never be able to get out of.
And it creates a higher two-tier society because all the rich own all the assets that are
Yes.
denominated in that failing currency.
Mm-hmm.
It's something called our listeners can look this up because I love finance. It's something called the Cantillon effect. There was an economist back in like the 16th century because money printing has always gone on. Fraud has always gone on.
Janet Yellen.
Yeah. So this is why you have all the CEOs of Goldman Sachs and shit like that. Merrill Lynch, Ronald Reagan's Treasury Secretary at the time was from Merrill Lynch. They all go into Secretary of Treasury because they're all crooks, right? They create all these bad loans.
And they can put their name on the federal note.
Yeah. And then they kind of like Steve Mnuchin.
Yeah.
Perfect example. Steve Mnuchin bought Indy Bank, which was a California bank that did subprime lending.
Mm-hmm.
He bought that and then flipped it around and became like a fucking billionaire. And then all of a sudden, because Steve Mnuchin, nobody even knew him. Now all of a sudden, he was running his own private equity firm after the fact.
Yeah, isn't that something?
A bunch of his money he got from Saudi Arabia, kind of like Jared Kushner and shit, right?
Yeah, Jared Kushner, the transhumanist guy. Yeah, he's weird. He's weird.
But it's called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect, to sum it up, is there's been a printing press all throughout history. So like in ancient France used to have a currency that was backed by mortgages, right? Because it's a real asset. So if it's a real asset, they can collateralize it essentially and leverage it up. Well,
and
that
they didn't have oil at that time.
Yeah, they didn't have that kind of shit like that, but they had mortgages, right? The lords and the serfs, that's kind of where it comes from. A mortgage means a death sentence, I think, or a death note. In Latin, I think it means a death note or some shit like that, or a death deal. But like ancient France had a currency that was backed by mortgages. The mortgages in that time collapsed, so did the currency then collapse because it was backed by it, right? Well, the Cantillon effect is essentially because of printing presses have been around for so long and fiat currencies have been along for so long, their intrinsic value always reverts to zero because it's just paper. It's just a bunch of IOUs. Well, you create too many IOUs and you don't have enough fucking money to pay it back. It just collapses, right?
Yeah.
The minute you can't stop issuing out IOUs, it collapses because everybody realizes you're not going to get paid back. So the Cantillon effect is essentially
it's pretty much creating money out of thin air.
It is. It's counterfeiting.
Or it's like grabbing money off of a money tree.
Yeah. And the money tree just keeps growing and growing.
Yeah, just keeps growing. Yeah.
Right. And then eventually, everybody's poor and then everybody's rich. That's why they say you will own nothing and you will be happy. Right. So the Cantillon effect is essentially the people, it's a ripple effect. Okay. So when they print money, they give it to the big banks because the big banks have all of the biggest clients that have collateral. Right? Like if you're poor as shit, you have no collateral. Most people have a leased car, they don't own it.
Yeah.
People have a gigantic mortgage they'll never be able to pay off. But the rich people, it's kind of like
assets.
Yeah. And the rich people are in debt up to their eyeballs. There's a lot of keeping up with the Jonases kind of thing. But the Cantillon effect is essentially they print money out of thin air. They give it to the big banks. Then the big banks give it to all their buddies, their rich buddies, to go and speculate and buy up all the poor people's shit because when it collapses, what little they did have.
So they're basically just stealing.
Yeah.
Stealing from the poor because the money is just going to collapse.
Right.
And
so
it's free. The poor are just going to be poor.
Yeah. And that's what's been going on for the last 50 years, right?
And it's just going to make them dependent on the rich people. And the rich people are going
it'll make them more dependent on the government.
Yeah, and then they would have to surrender their rights.
Yes. Right. So the government gets the money from the rich, the rich corporations and shit, like BlackRock. I've said that before. BlackRock is just another form of the government. It's just another arm of the government.
Yeah, endless amounts of money there.
Right. So the Cantillon effect is just a ripple effect where the people at the front of the line, the bankers and the rich people, get the money first. So they buy everything up. and they buy everything up as it's cheap. Then they jack up all the prices on shit, and by the time the little guy gets the money, he can't buy shit because the currency has been devalued through so many steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many, it has to go through so many people.
Yeah.
Well, eventually, due to all the money printing, the end stage is where the government tries to soak the rich because they can no longer, they have to listen to their constituents, right? Like if everybody's poor as shit, eventually they're just going to slit all the politicians' throats and shit, right? Because you're bought.
Yes.
So the politicians, in a backstabbing way, they made the rich richer by printing money every time there's a crisis.
But
But
they're
then they end
also
up,
the scapegoat.
yep, and now they use like Elizabeth Warren uses. Oh, we need to use the rich as a scapegoat. Now we need a billionaire tax. Well, every fucking time you guys crash the economy, you bail out the rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what Occupy Wall Street was about. That's what the Tea Party was about. I've said that before.
Any
They
good
both had
movies to watch on that?
um there's a good movie called Inside Job I just watched again.
Who's in
It's a
that?
it's actually a documentary.
Oh.
It's narrated by Matt Damon of all people.
Matt
But it's got
Damon.
like George Soros in it and stuff like that. And they
Oh,
explain
yeah.
the collapse, and like all they did in the 2008 collapse is they took all the debt on the corporations and they put it on the poor people. They put it on the middle class and shit. So there's two balance sheet, actually there's three balance sheets. There's the public balance sheet, aka the government that prints the money,
Yep.
right? The treasury and stuff like that. Then there's the Federal Reserve balance sheet, which is the money creators. They loan the money to corporations and the government. And then there's the private balance sheet with all the corporations and shit like that, the big banks.
Mm-hmm.
So all we did is we switched all that debt from consumers, the average American, got ripped off and all those bad mortgages and shit like that. Uh, that all trickled up into the big banks. They had all this bad debt that they couldn't get rid of fast enough, called liquidity. Liquidity is where you sell an asset in order to get exchange for cash, but the speed at which you can do it, right?
Yeah.
If there's no liquidity, it means essentially there's no fucking buyers that are going to give you money. They don't want to buy your shit because they can't price it right.
Let's not forget that during the pandemic, while we were all suffering and feeling the loss, feeling, a heavy withdrawal in the
Mm-hmm.
pocketbook, that there were 600, millionaires that became billionaires during the
Right,
pandemic.
right, because all their assets got bailed out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I say. It's camouflage. They bailed out the big banks again.
Yeah, that and then corporations got to stay open while
The
small
little
mom and
mom and
pop.
pop got wiped out again. It's
Yep.
very similar to 2008.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why I was saying, like, even when 2019 hit, I, yeah, I was like telling everybody, like, hey, if some shit's coming down, the credit markets are freezing up.
And it's not just the pandemic that's done this. There's actually, I think there was like a documentary about like Walmart, like when Walmart would move into like a town
Wipe out
and
all
yeah,
mom and pop
wipe out
shop.
all the mom and pop shops because they would have everything that you would need right there
Yeah.
at that one store.
Well, not even that. They're subsidized by the government. Okay. So this is kind of where I said before with my previous supply chain professor was that Amazon and Walmart are the two biggest employers in the world. They have
Hmm.
like something like 10 million, a million employees or some shit like that, each of it. So do you ever think the government would let them fail? No,
No.
exactly. So this is what I mean. So you're having essentially it's something called like modern day imperialism where all the good jobs don't pay shit and all the
Hmm.
fucking jobs that are left are dog shit like retail ones like Amazon warehouse worker
Hmm.
and Walmarts and shit like that. I mean, we all seen those videos during the pandemic where you had health inspectors coming into small businesses and shutting them down
Mm-hmm.
using the police and
Yep.
health inspectors.
While there was barely any capacity limits on the big box stores and
Yeah, Target wide open.
yep.
There's a guy on CNBC, Rick Santelli, and he was arguing with this piece of shit guy, Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's a fucking piece of shit in my book. Well, Andrew Ross Sorkin was very well known for writing a book called Too Big to Fail. It's a great
Mhm.
book, but he's a piece of shit. Like he's a product of that financial system where like, yeah, what the bankers did was wrong, but like they're the only ones who could fix this mess. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, don't you want to admit that they created it? Well, let's not talk about the past, right? So there was a rant, the Tea Party in
Mhm.
2010. That
Yeah.
was essentially created by the guy Rick Santelli because he went on a rant to Obama and shit on national TV calling him a socialist. Like, why do I have to bail out my neighbor who has a 6 bedroom house and like works at McDonald's?
Mhm.
I paid my mortgage. I'm a good creditor. Why do we have to bail out our piece of shit neighbors who over leverage themselves? Right? So that
Yep.
kind of like riled everybody up and was like, yeah, fuck that. Like that's bull crap. Why am I having to bail out these idiots and, when I did everything right? Well, because you all got scammed. They took all your mortgages and they bundled them up. Didn't matter if it was a good mortgage or a bad mortgage. It was just all bundled in the same fucking cesspool.
People are still the middle class is still bailing out people.
Yeah. And that's just
Every paycheck you're bailing somebody out. You're bailing
hmm
somebody out in Social Security.
yeah,
You're bailing somebody out in government housing
yep.
and
Social
food
Security
stamps.
is a generational Ponzi scheme, essentially.
Yeah.
You could be a billionaire. Look at how they handled the PPP loans and shit like that. You had billionaires getting stimulus checks
Mm-hmm.
because
That's
it's something called,
insane.
yeah, Milton Friedman came up with the term helicopter money,
Mm-hmm.
where there's going to be such a big giant debt crisis. He died in like 2006, right before the financial crisis hit, actually. But he was world renowned economist for a long time, Milton Friedman. And he said that essentially there would be so much corruption between the government and the financial system that they would just rip so many people off and create all these bad loans and shit to eventually the whole system would collapse and the central banks would come in and create something called helicopter money where like they just spray money fucking everywhere. It didn't matter if you're a billionaire or dirt poor, they just had to get money going again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what happened on COVID, or the pandemic. They sprayed fucking money everywhere. They didn't know where it went. They said like,
The American Rescue Plan
yeah, all of that. The
under
the
Trump
family health
and
or the
Biden.
Family Care Act or some shit like
Yeah,
that. Right?
under Trump and Biden.
Yeah, they just keep the system going, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is why now it's gotten to the point where nobody believes any institution. You don't believe education, you don't believe Medicare or medical, you don't believe the government, you don't believe the state governments, you don't believe the federal governments.
And they're just giving you more of a reason to not even believe. You can listen to them,
Hmm.
but you do not have to believe them or
Right.
do what they say.
Right now they're trying to
This is
misdirect
this
everybody.
is our country. Remember,
Hmm.
our country.
Right
They
now they're
work
trying to
for
misdirect
us.
everybody with Ukraine and shit as a
Yes,
proxy war.
they're trying to misdirect everybody because they know that the majority of us.
Are starting to realize what the fuck is
Yes.
going on. They never
Mm-hmm.
solved 2008. 2008 was the iceberg, the Titanic hitting the iceberg. Then we were just coasting for about a good 10 years, right? Just like on the movie
Mm-hmm.
Titanic. What was that? Oh, don't worry about it. Right? And when I explain behavioral economics to people, I always use the movie The Titanic as a perfect example of behavioral economics.
Oh, if you go to the beginning of the Titanic when he's playing cards to
Mhm.
he's like playing poker or whatever to get
Yeah.
on the boat. The guys he's playing against are Olaf and Sven. Does that have any resemblance to you?
No.
Frozen, dog.
Oh.
Frozen. Let it go. Let it go.
But I explain to people, like, if you want to learn behavioral economics and the way that the system works, watch the movie The Titanic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So quick breakdown of that.
Oh,
You
yeah.
had the you had
Billy
this
Zane with the kid.
yeah, I have a child. And so you had the super rich at the top of the boat, you had the super poor at the bottom of the boat, and then you
That
had the
also
middle
worked on the
class.
boat, right?
Yep, the middle class were the people that worked on the boat. The waiters, the steam engine people, the coal people shoveling coal, they had a job. The people at dirt poor, they were at the bottom of the boat, they didn't have a job. They were going to America to get jobs. But you had the super rich. And, I try to explain this shit to a lot of our liberal friends at bonfires and stuff like that. Like, for the longest time, they were calling me a fucking crazy and a conspiracy theorist, but I knew exactly what was going to happen if shit hit
Yeah.
the fan. Because just like the movie, and I literally broke it down just like how I broke it down now. I don't have to remind anybody who's ever seen the movie The Titanic. What do they do to the poor once the water started to hit their ankles and shit? Right? The water
Mm-hmm.
hit the bottom first, the poor people first. They started to realize what was going on. What happened? They tried to make their way up to the top. So what did they do? They locked them all down there, right? So that the rich could get off of the boat first.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it was all hell breaking loose and the poor eventually broke through the gates, then what did the narrative change to? Oh, now it's only women and children,
But then
right?
what did Billy Zane do?
Billy Zane tried to buy his way on, right?
Yeah.
But
It's my child. I have a child.
yeah, just like in the movie The Titanic, you'll remember that one guard or whatnot. He threw his money back at Billy Zane and said, "Your money is no better off than, or you're no better off than I am at this point."
Mm-hmm.
And that's eventually what will happen when the system deteriorates. Like money
Pretty
will
much
become
called Billy Zane
useless.
a coward.
Yeah, Billy Zane, he was fucking Billy Zane and shit. He tried to use his henchmen and shit. But I tell everybody, like, they were making fun of me and shit when I had all my toilet paper, my water, and my supply room
Gas,
shit.
gasoline.
Yeah, gasoline stored and shit. They were making fun of me. And I said, well, look, you've all seen the movie The Titanic, right? Don't hate me. I'm just like Rose. I'm smart enough to observe there's not enough fucking lifeboats. And I also know human nature when shit hits the fan. Everybody freaks out. Everybody looks to the people in charge to tell them what to do. And they could give two shits because they're in the same boat as everybody else. It's every
I don't think Jack needed to die at the end. I think he would have
no.
lived. He could have lived.
Yeah,
He
he
was
could have.
being too generous, dude.
Well, that's just it. I think that's just kind of like, like
He could have
I,
just
I hate to
climbed up
break
there
it, but
right
like
next to her.
I hate to break it, but like Rose is kind of like a piece of shit in that movie.
Yeah.
She's getting
Didn't even know how to
all this.
spit, dude. She didn't even know how to spit.
Yeah, she spit on Billy Zane and shit. But at the same time, I'm like, Rose is kind of like a piece of shit. She used
Mhm.
Billy Zane to get all these nice meals and shit. He
Well,
courts
Rose's
her.
mom was a bigger piece of shit.
Yeah, Rose's mom was a piece of shit.
She's a
And so
gold digger, dog.
yeah, so clearly it goes in the family. So so Billy Zane spends all this goddamn money to buy you the Hope Diamond. It
Mm-hmm.
still isn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go and fuck the poor guy. He dies. He
Yeah.
dies. He dies because of your ass, because you're selfish. And you didn't want to move over on the piano.
Yeah.
He dies. And then Billy Zane ends up blowing his brains out supposedly at the end of the movie. And she still makes out with the diamond.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes and bangs another guy and has a bunch of kids with him. That doesn't sound like a love story. It sounds like a horror story. You know? But yeah, the same way that the sister works, like I said, everybody, you ever want to learn about behavioral economics, watch the movie The Titanic. It'll teach you
There's
about human behavior, the different social classes, and anytime there's a financial crisis or just a crisis in general, how humans will behave, you know? Then
There
all of a
was
sudden,
a
Fabricio's bitch ass got shot for no reason.
there was a TikTok that I saw of of some guy that took out Rose's face for like certain scenes and,
Hmm.
and
Put a cat.
put his cat in
Yeah, I see
there.
that one.
That was awesome.
Dude, TikTok. I hope they don't ban TikTok because, dude, there's been a couple of TikToks I've watched where I just been pissing my pants laughing.
Yeah. Dude, I like there was a guy on Rogan that said like he believes that the government doesn't want to ban TikTok
Because
because
it
it's
keeps
spyware.
everybody duped up.
Yeah,
It releases dopamine.
yeah, because it's like it they want to ban TikTok because it's kicking Silicon Valley's ass, is what he was
Hmm.
saying.
Yeah, it is. But at the same time, like China's genius. They're like, no, we'll just put a bunch of engineering videos on and we'll just put a bunch of like people farting in each other's faces in America. And we'll just let America destroy itself.
Uh-huh.
You know? But I seen this one TikTok recently where I was just pissing my pants and it was like it said, like they have a little lettering on there and it said when your foreman is telling you how to avoid OSHA violations to get the
Mm-hmm.
job done quicker, some shit like that.
Yeah.
And then it switched over to training day and shit. And they had Ethan Hawke, and he's like, come on now, I can't be like this. And then Denzel's like, I'm sorry I brought you up into this, but that's the way that it is. And Ethan Hawke's like, no, 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 it can't be like that. I was laughing my ass off, but that's really how it is with bosses and shit. You
Hmm.
know, we care about safety, but if somebody dies, we'll just throw you under the bus and bring in the next knucklehead.
Hmm.
And
Exactly, dog.
they could give two shits, oh well, we got some reparations for you, here's some pizza.
Pizza party.
And that's just it. I wouldn't be surprised if they start giving out like what do they call it, those little fruit platters or whatnot, veggie plat
Fruitcakes?
no
Oh
veggie
yeah, yeah,
platters.
yeah, that or like a
we're gonna
sausage and
change it
cheese
we're gonna change
platter.
it up from the pizza parties to veggie platters now. What
Actually,
the fuck? I don't want
sausage and
carrots, I'll
cheese
take the
platter
pizza.
might be more pricier than the veggie platter.
Right. But I'm
Yeah.
laughing my ass off on that shit. But back to one of the things, I think it was might have been Andrew Jackson. I think Andrew Jackson said first they steal the central banks and shit like that because
Hmm.
Andrew Jackson I think was the only person or the only president ever to pay off the national debt. And once Andrew Jackson paid off the national debt, he got rid of the central banks and shit because you're always indebted to the banks.
And then they assassinated him.
Yeah, they tried to assassinate his ass. But he said that central banks steal your wealth through inflation first and then by deflation. Well, we got the inflation part now, and then when everything crashes, they'll come on back and then scoop up all your shit.
March 15th, dog.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that, March
Yeah,
15th.
yep, March 15th.
But it's starting to look that way, like the market, because I pay attention to the market and the bond market all the time, and it's starting to wobble, but like the biggest problem is the debt market right now with interest rates going up. Like
Hmm.
I said before, the bond market is like 10 to 20 times bigger than the stock market.
Yeah.
And if that starts to fucking blow up, like
Is
you
that's not supposed to be like that?
no, I mean
Is
interest
it
rates
supposed
have
to be opposite?
well, money either flows into the debt market or it flows into the stock market. It can flow into both,
Hmm.
but like it's kind of like the stock market is kind of like a flow chart of like where money is going.
So most of the money's flowing into the debt market.
No, most of the money's flowing out of the debt market.
Oh, that's fucked up, dog.
So when it's flowing out of the debt market, that means interest rates go up, yields go up in order to attract investors.
Yeah.
But why would you keep buying bonds, debt instruments, if the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates? You could buy it and lose money right away.
This is not a good time to invest in really anything. I mean,
No. And I
like,
always say, like, the first thing you should do is invest in a fucking gun.
yeah, there you go, dog.
Right?
Gun.
Because if humans kind of like never learn from their past mistake, but they pick up on markers in
Mhm.
anticipation of something worse, right?
Yeah.
So if it's kind of one of those things like, okay, COVID was, or the pandemic was fucking absolutely horrible, and like so many people got fucked over and died just on the solution to it, right?
Mhm.
So what if all of a sudden like you start to see over the a new virus or the bird flu or some shit like that? People will slowly start to anticipate, well, this is going to happen again. So they'll start to front run.
They'll start to go out and buy shit and sell it all,
Exactly.
buy it
In
all the
bulk.
toilet paper and all
Yep.
the baby formula, all the
All the
diapers.
batteries and shit like that. Right.
Yep.
So humans humans are dumb on the initial crisis, but they
Mhm.
anticipate the second crisis because now they're kind of like aware of it
Yep.
and the reaction and kind of like how bad it can get so quickly. You know, I always liken it to being on an airplane. You get that first
Mhm.
turbulent drop, you're like,
Yep.
ooh,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you feel it again, and then you're like,
Mhm.
whoa. But that's kind of what it is. Like humans aren't dumb. A lot of them are, but humans will always anticipate it just through word of mouth kind of shit.
Yes.
You know, like a lot of us were supposed to learn from our great grandparents or whatnot about the Great Depression and shit.
Mhm.
Oh, that'll never happen again. And then boom, it happens in our lifetime again.
Mhm.
You know, and then they're like, well, you know, didn't you listen? But that's just human nature and shit like that. That's why I say the first thing you should get is, you know, what is it? In the Marines, they say two is one and one is none, right?
um, Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Yeah, some shit like that. But I also know like there's that saying or whatnot in the military or what have you, where it's two is one is none. So always have a backup, you know,
Mhm.
have a plan B, and then also have a plan C.
Yeah, plan B should be don't buy out the whole damn store when you go shopping or if they're, look, you have to look at it like this. We're on the verge of a crisis. Okay? That doesn't mean that you need to go buy out the whole store. That means maybe take like extra $50 and buy yourself your normal groceries, but
Hmm.
then, take like an extra $50
Some
and
rice.
buy some food that you can store
Hmm.
or some toiletry, like an extra pack of toilet paper. And just instead of buying that all at once, do that like weekly or whenever it is that you go to the store.
Right, but you always got to remember, people are fucking stupid. They wait till the last minute and then they blame somebody else for hoarding, you know?
Hmm.
I mean, that's kind of like remember the hurricanes in Florida and Puerto Rico and shit?
Yes.
You live on an island and El Nino wipes out Puerto Rico every fucking like 5 years.
Hmm.
I think you should invest in a generator, you know? And
And
there's so many.
wasn't there in Puerto Rico, wasn't there like a supply warehouse that was
Yeah,
like
full
fully
of all the.
stocked?
Yeah,
But
all the supplies.
the lady tried to make it political, saying that Trump wasn't helping her or something like
Yeah,
that.
because they don't give a shit about anybody. That's
Hmm.
what I mean. We're in that last stage where nobody even want the people that we elect don't even fucking try to do the bare minimum. They just
Hmm.
care about their power and trying to destroy their enemies political wise. They could give two shits about us. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
You had all those people, you know, the people of Puerto Rico should have slit her throat and hanged her. You know, they used to tar and feather fucking people like
Oh,
that.
and wasn't she like wearing she like had like her own brand of shirts, like,
Yeah.
disrespecting like the president.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. And then, you know, it's just a shit show. And yet
She
they
pretty much
use
used that whole crisis to advertise her hate for the president.
right, all of them did. You know,
Hmm.
remember Kumo? Everybody was
Yeah,
praising Kumo and shit, and then all of a sudden he's like hitting and sexual harassing chicks, and then
yeah,
it's like, well, we
yeah.
got to cover that up, but it's too
Hmm.
big now. It's already out of the box, you know.
Hmm.
But I remember during COVID, they were praising Kumo and they wanted him to run for president and shit because that's just the way that the system works. You have no power. It's the haves and the have-nots. And it'll just keep getting worse and worse and worse until eventually something so big happens where the government will try to take complete and utter control of shit.
I think New York would be better off with Andrew Cuomo than that Katie Hochul chick or whatever her name is,
Yeah,
Christy
well,
Hochul,
at
whatever.
this point, at this point of the fourth turning, it doesn't matter who's in charge because the system is so deteriorated
Yeah, we're all
and
screwed
dilapidated.
regardless. We're all
Now
screwed.
they're just now it's just become a big giant blame game, and
Mm-hmm.
you're dealing with a bunch of sociopaths. I'm not the problem, and my administration isn't the problem, or even the bills I enacted aren't the problem. You saying I'm the problem is the problem.
You, the citizens, are the problem because you don't want to fund Ukraine for their war effort.
Right. But, Ohio's burning and shit, and we have like a natural catastrophe.
Yeah.
But, you know, in my personal opinion, we're only the big financial crisis, you know who Dan Pena is?
No.
They call him the $1 trillion man or some shit like that because he's just a hardcore motherfucker that just, he's kind of like one of them gurus.
Oh, he's like Andrew Tate.
Yeah, but he's older. He went to every continent. He went to Antarctica. Just a hardcore
Mm,
motherfucker. He's like 70 years old. Wakes up, works 16-hour days.
yeah.
He's just a hardcore motherfucker. But like
What does he do?
he got his start in the financial system trading commodities. I think
Mm,
back in like the 70s or 80s or some shit like that. And then he made a shit ton of wealth. And then he essentially has his own school, kind of like Andrew Tate, how they explain to you how the system works.
yeah.
Right? You borrow money and you buy assets with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way that the system works is, why would you kind of like Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki? Why would you be saving money if they keep printing money?
Yeah.
Right? So you should take out loans because debt you don't have to pay taxes on.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the rich stay rich. But every single time there's a debt crisis, the rich get bailed out. Well, why should
Yeah.
they get bailed out when they're the ones taking on all the debt? Well, that's how the system works, right?
Mm-hmm.
I tell everybody, and I'll tell our listeners, the Dow Jones could be 60,000, but we're all like dead. That's why every single time, you hear on like maybe mainstream media, like the stock market is so disconnected from reality and shit. You know, Main Street's burning and shit, but Wall Street is just gambling.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using your money to gamble and shit because they don't give a shit about you.
No, they don't.
No,
They
they
never
care
will.
about their bonuses and shit like that. But eventually, this is where an economist, Peter Schiff, says that we're essentially going into a currency crisis. And this
Mm-hmm.
is why the premise, the origins of Bitcoin was created, is because Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, who's
Yeah.
anonymous, he realized that the way that they got out of the 2008 mess was by printing money. So what's stopping them to keep funding all of these liabilities that we can't pay for? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're all going to go bust,
Mm-hmm.
right? The birth rate is dropping like a motherfucker.
Yes, it is.
People aren't having kids. Well, how can that's unsustainable? That's why China just got rid of their one child only thing
Mm-hmm.
because they realized like shit, we need more people.
Yeah.
It- it's a big giant Ponzi scheme. You just got to keep getting dumber and dumber people into it.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you can't get any more dumb people into it, the whole system collapses.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. But Peter Schiff says that, the 2008 crisis he predicted, but he wasn't worried about the crisis. He was worried about how the government was going to solve that problem. And he knew that the government is corrupt and so unrestrained and so embedded with Wall Street that they would just keep printing money. Every single time there's a crisis, they just print money.
Mm.
So he said, like, the financial crisis that he says, you know, that's why the government has to keep injecting money into the system, Ukraine and shit like that.
Yeah.
But by my prediction, the real big giant financial crisis is going to be in like 2025, 2026. All those people during 2020 and 2021 that refinanced all their mortgages from, 5% or whatnot down to 2%,
Yeah.
they took all that money out of HELOCs and used their homes as ATMs again, just like they did in 2000 to 2008.
Yeah.
And they're going to run out of all that money and shit to keep them afloat, because as long as inflation's going up, they'll eventually run out of it. And then the government's going to spray even more fucking money. I just saw something where they said that the national debt is going to rise by like something like 15 trillion or maybe even 20 trillion over the next 10 years.
So we're looking at $52 trillion worth
Yeah,
of debt.
in the next 10 years, because we're, even when Trump's supposed economy was doing so good, he was running $1 trillion deficits and shit. So it's kind of like, even in the good times, they're still going into debt a lot. In the bad times, they go into, you know,
Really
5 times.
shitty times, yeah.
So it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. That's why I say, like, get a fucking gun, buy some precious metals or whatnot, get some Bitcoin if you need it.
Build a bunker.
Yeah, build a bunker, get a dog.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of that shit is just eventually going to come down the pipeline. But that's why the government is going to, like I said on the last podcast, they need to find a new boogeyman or create an even bigger crisis to cover up the crisis that's already coming. Because if it's all going to blow up, you're better off creating a crisis that you created. That way you can control the outcome of it, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of like the World Economic Forum and shit. Why isn't Klaus Schwab in fucking jail, Well, because they need a patsy, If shit hits the fan, they'll just blame him or some shit,
He
They'll
does a
blame
good
some
job at speaking
agenda.
their agenda into existence.
Right.
Yes.
Put this microchip in your forehead,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Cut your ping ping off.
Yeah.
It's good for
Don't
you.
ask, no questions. But yeah, yeah, we're over an hour already.
Yeah. I think that's gonna do it, Doc.
Yeah, we got a good one going.
Yeah.
Check one out in like 2 days or some shit like that.
Yeah.
For our listeners, you can find us on truth_overfacts at twitter.com, right? Or
Yep.
that's a Gmail one.
Um.
No,
Is
truth
it?
over facts podcast at gmail.com. And then
Yeah.
it's truth_overfacts
Facts.
at twitter.com.
Yep.
Or at Twitter. At
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk.
Yeah. Elon Musk. Yep.
Well, I'm your host, Dylan.
I'm Ronnie.
And we'll catch up with you guys later.
Yep.
Shebang-a-bang.
Good night, everybody.